Welcome to the Right News Network.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emma with the headlines that matter most right now. Conflict between the U.S. and Iran just entered its 10th week with no end in sight. President Trump is reviewing Iran's new 14-point peace proposal, but he's already casting serious doubt on whether it will work. Watch this space as tensions remain high and Trump keeps military options firmly on the table. The Iran-Israel conflict is sending shockwaves through global markets, from airline fuel costs to drug prices across the Middle East. Our Middle East correspondent Layla Nazari has more. Layla?
Thanks, Emma. Well, what we're seeing right now is a real cascade of economic problems stemming from this conflict. Energy prices are volatile, which is affecting airlines directly. The White House said just yesterday that profit margins are going to take a hit for at least the next 3 months. But here's what's really concerning. In Iran itself, drug prices are spiking because the war is disrupting pharmaceutical supply chains. That's hitting regular people where it counts.
So, how long do experts think this instability is actually going to last?
Look, that's the million-dollar question. Chevron's CEO basically said nobody can really predict it because markets respond in unpredictable ways. But the longer this tension stays elevated, the worse it gets for everyone, especially ordinary Iranians trying to access medicines they need. We could be looking at a months-long situation here.
Layla Nazari, thank you. Remaining with world affairs, the stakes of this energy warfare are enormous. Both sides are now targeting economic lifelines. Layla is still with us. Layla, what is the latest from the ground?
Well, Emma, what we're seeing is a real shift in how both Russia and Ukraine are fighting this war. They're not just going after military targets anymore. They're going straight at the economic infrastructure that keeps each side functioning. Ukraine hit Russian oil terminals and tankers in the Shadow Fleet, and Russia's responding with massive drone attacks on Ukrainian cities. It's becoming as much about economic collapse as it is about territorial gains.
How sustainable is this strategy for either side?
Look, here's the thing. Russia's got deep pockets and can absorb damage to its oil sector because energy prices are high globally. But Ukraine doesn't have that cushion. Every strike on Odessa or Kherson hits civilians and critical infrastructure they desperately need. So while Ukraine's targeting Russia's wallet, Russia's targeting Ukraine's ability to survive day to day. That's an asymmetry that favors Moscow over time.
Layla, appreciate it. Remaining with the Middle East, Israel's detention of Gaza aid activists is now extending tensions in already fragile ceasefire talks. Spain and Brazil have expressed concern over the prolonged holding of their nationals, with reports indicating detainees have alleged torture during questioning. Watch for whether international pressure forces Israel to release the activists or whether negotiations collapse entirely. The Pentagon is pulling 5,000 troops from Germany, and President Trump says that's just the beginning. He plans significantly deeper cuts ahead. The withdrawal alarmed top Republican lawmakers and NATO allies who worry it weakens deterrence against Russia. Watch for announcements on troop reductions in Spain and Italy next. Also on the world front, Iran has now presented a 14-point peace plan as tensions with the United States escalate over how to end the ongoing regional war. Tehran is currently reviewing Washington's response to the proposal. Senate Democrats, including Armed Services Committee ranking member Jack Reed, are questioning whether the Trump administration has any coherent strategy at all, with Reed saying the U.S. is in a much worse position with Iran since the conflict began. Watch for Iran's next move on the diplomatic track in the coming days. The European Union is firing back at Donald Trump over his plans to hit vehicles with major new tariffs, and there's another challenge emerging for the former president. Our Washington correspondent Marcus Webb has more. Marcus?
Well, Emma, the EU trade chief came out hard against these tariff plans, calling them unacceptable. Trump announced he wants to increase duties on cars coming into the U.S., and Brussels is making it clear they're not going to take that lying down. What's interesting is this is happening as Trump's support is actually slipping among young men, which is a demographic he's traditionally done well with.
So, how serious is the EU's threat to retaliate?
Look, I think they're dead serious. They've got major automakers like Volkswagen and BMW that depend on U.S. sales, so they're going to protect those interests. If Trump goes through with this, you're looking at a trade fight that could drag on for months, maybe longer. And honestly, the timing's not great for him politically if he's already losing ground with younger voters over economic concerns.
Marcus, appreciate it. Oil markets faced fresh uncertainty Monday as OPEC Plus approved a modest production increase following the UAE's surprise exit from the cartel, raising questions about the group's long-term stability. The symbolic quota hike signals the organization intends to function normally despite losing a major member. Watch whether other nations follow the UAE's lead in abandoning the cartel over the coming weeks. Two U.S. Army soldiers have vanished during joint military exercises in Morocco, sparking an urgent search and rescue operation. The service members went missing near Tantan in the country's southwest while on a hike after African lion training concluded. U.S. and Moroccan forces are now scouring the mountainous region to bring them home. President Zelensky is taking Ukraine's military case directly to the Middle East, demonstrating that his country has emerged stronger from the conflict in Iran. The high-stakes diplomatic tour suggests Ukraine may now have the leverage needed to negotiate with Russia from a position of actual military strength. We'll be watching for any formal ceasefire talks that could reshape the conflict's trajectory.
Time to go deeper. Beyond the headlines, our full analysis of the story shaping the world right now.
We are 10 weeks into a conflict that has shut down one of the world's most critical shipping lanes, sent energy prices through the roof, and left Western governments scrambling for a response that looks more like coherence than chaos. Tonight, Iran has submitted a 14-point peace proposal to the United States, and Donald Trump has already told the world he can't imagine it would be acceptable, even before reading it. He's reviewing it now. He's left the door open for new strikes, and he's vowing to maintain the naval blockade. The Strait of Hormuz is still closed, the world is still paying, and nobody in this crisis looks like they have a clear path to the exit. Joining me now are Marcus Webb, our defense and security analyst, and Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor. Marcus, let me start with you. Is Trump's preemptive skepticism about this Iranian proposal a sign of strategic discipline, or is he walking us toward an escalation that nobody can control?
Thanks, Emma. Look, I think the question almost answers itself, and I'd say the preemptive skepticism is entirely rational, and here's why. This is the second Iranian proposal Trump has rejected this week. The first one he turned down because Tehran wasn't willing to give Washington what it, quote, needs to have. Now we've got a 14-point document, and I'd wager serious money that point 14 is not, we'll dismantle our nuclear enrichment program and stop funding proxy militias across the Middle East. Iran is doing what Iran always does. It's submitting paper while maintaining the economic weapon. Hormuz stays shut even as they hand over a peace proposal. That's not a peace strategy. That's a stalling strategy. Douglas Murray has been making this point for years. The Islamic Republic's negotiating posture is almost always designed to buy time, not to reach resolution. Trump's instinct here, that Iran hasn't yet paid a big enough price, is the correct strategic read. Weakness and premature concession is what got us to this point in the first place. The hard truth is that maximum pressure, maintained consistently, is the only thing that has ever produced genuine behavioral change from Tehran.
But Marcus, with the greatest respect, Trump's vow to maintain the naval blockade while Iran's Hormuz closure stays in place, aren't we at serious risk of turning a regional conflict into a full-scale economic catastrophe for the West? And Sophia, what's your take on this?
Well, look, I respect Marcus's strategic framework enormously, but here's what I think he's underweighting. 20% of global oil trade through that strait, 21 million barrels a day in normal times, gone for 10 weeks. The Telegraph is reporting that Britain's food chain is already broken. Not strained, broken. And that's just the UK. We're talking about inflation feeding through to every Western economy simultaneously, while ordinary people pay the price at the petrol pump and the supermarket checkout. The uncomfortable truth is that maximum pressure costs us too. And the question I'd want answered before I signed off on Trump's strategy is, at what point does domestic political pressure inside the United States, gas prices, food prices, consumer pain, force a premature diplomatic climb down that actually rewards Iran for the hostage-taking approach it's applied to global energy markets? The data suggests that authoritarian regimes can absorb economic pain that democracies cannot, because they don't face elections. Iran's leadership is not facing a ballot box. Trump's party is. That asymmetry is the strategic risk nobody in the hawkish camp is being honest about.
I hear what Sophia is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. The argument, it costs us too, so we should back down, is precisely the argument that produced the JCPOA disaster. Yes, maintaining pressure has costs. Yes, the Hormuz closure is hurting Western economies. But here's the fundamental question. What does backing down cost? What does a partial deal that allows Iran to walk away with its nuclear program and its proxy network intact actually buy us? 6 months? 18 months? And then we're back here again, except Iran is closer to a nuclear weapon and has learned definitively that economic warfare against the West produces concessions. The pain now is the price of not paying a far greater price later. Short sentences, because this matters. Strength deters. Weakness invites. Every time the West has blinked at a critical moment, Obama's red line in Syria, the JCPOA cash payments, the European appeasement of Iranian behavior post-2018, Iran has escalated every single time. I'm not prepared to recommend another round of that failure, dressed up as diplomacy.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the question that I think keeps strategists awake at night. If this 14-point proposal is rejected, which Trump is clearly telegraphing it likely will be, what actually happens next? Are we looking at resumed strikes, a permanent Hormuz closure, or something worse? Sophia, where do you see this going?
The way I see this playing out, and I want to be clear, these are scenarios, not certainties. The most probable short-term outcome is a partial deal that nobody is happy with, but everyone can live with for now. Tehran offers something cosmetic on nuclear transparency. Washington agrees to ease some of the naval pressure. Hormuz partially reopens, and both sides declare a form of victory. Markets would rally. Energy prices would ease. And then, and this is the bit that worries me most, the underlying architecture of this conflict remains completely unresolved, and we reset the clock. If current trends continue toward a breakdown without any deal, the economic trajectory for the UK and Europe in particular is genuinely alarming. Britain's food chain vulnerability, as the Telegraph has documented, is not a short-term disruption story. It's a structural exposure story.
Here's what concerns me most, and it's actually a different risk to what Sophia is identifying. The risk isn't that Trump escalates too hard. The risk is that the pressure campaign is abandoned just as it's beginning to work. Iran's economy is in crisis. The rial is collapsing. Internal pressure on the regime is real. If the West maintains resolve for another 6 to 8 weeks, the trajectory suggests we get genuine concessions rather than cosmetic ones. What history tells us, from Reagan and the Soviets to the First Gulf War, is that decisive American resolve, maintained consistently, produces results. The failure mode isn't too much pressure. It's pressure applied inconsistently, abandoned prematurely, because the diplomatic class gets nervous and the editorial boards get squeamish. That is how we end up with Iran nuclear capable and Hormuz as a permanent weapon in Tehran's arsenal.
Gentlemen and Sophia, the 14-point proposal is on Trump's desk tonight, the naval blockade holds, and somewhere in Tehran, the clerical leadership is watching American resolve for the first time in years. One thing is absolutely certain. Somebody in that regime is not sleeping well tonight, and they probably should not be. Two U.S. Army service members are missing tonight in southwestern Morocco. after going on a hike following the conclusion of the day's activities at African Lion, America's largest annual joint military exercise on the African continent. AFRICOM confirmed the soldiers went missing near the remote city of Tantan in mountainous terrain, and a search and rescue operation involving American, Moroccan, and partner nation forces is now underway. This is, first and foremost, a story about two human beings in danger, and we hope fervently they're found safe. But it's also a story that raises serious, urgent questions about the scope, the cost, and the strategic rationale of America's sprawling military footprint across 53 African nations. Joining me now are Sophia Reeves, our economics and markets editor, and James Chen, our geopolitical analyst. Sophia, let me start with you. Does this incident expose a deeper problem with how America deploys its military on a continent where the results, by almost any measure, have been deeply disappointing?
Thanks, Emma. And let's be absolutely clear. The first priority tonight is those two soldiers, and every resource should be directed at bringing them home safely. That's non-negotiable. But you're right that this incident doesn't exist in a vacuum. African Lion has been running since 2004. AFRICOM has been consuming billions of American taxpayer dollars since 2007. And what does America have to show for it? The Sahel has seen 6 military coups since 2020 alone. Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, countries where American security assistance poured in for years, have expelled American forces and rolled out the welcome mat for Russian Wagner mercenaries. Douglas Murray would say, and I think he'd be absolutely right, that Western nations have confused military activity with military strategy. Presence is not a policy. Exercises are not a doctrine. And the uncomfortable truth that nobody in the Pentagon wants to say out loud is that this enormous institutional machine has been very effective at perpetuating itself and very ineffective at producing the stability it promised Congress 20 years ago.
But Sophia, isn't that a bit unfair? Morocco specifically is one of America's most cooperative and stable African partners. They signed the Abraham Accords, they're consistent on counterterrorism, and African Lion in Morocco is arguably one of AFRICOM's more defensible programs. Are you throwing the whole enterprise out because of failures elsewhere on the continent? And James, what's your take on this?
Well, look, Emma's actually made a really important distinction that I think Sophia is glossing over, and I'll say that directly. Morocco is not Niger. Morocco is not Mali. The strategic relationship with Rabat is genuinely productive. It serves American interests in North Africa, and the African Lion exercise in that specific context has real value for interoperability with a reliable partner. Here's what I think Sophia is missing. The problem isn't the existence of AFRICOM or the fact that America has African partnerships. The problem is the absence of prioritization and the absence of accountability for outcomes. According to AFRICOM's own data, over $2.5 billion in security assistance has flowed to African partner nations. That investment produced American-trained officers who then staged coups. That's a specific, measurable failure that demands a specific, targeted response, not a wholesale retreat from the continent.
I hear what James is saying, but with respect, that misses the point entirely. Yes, Morocco is different from Niger. I know that. But the institutional problem is that AFRICOM doesn't treat them differently. It treats the entire continent as one enormous mandate to be managed with the same toolkit regardless of the strategic environment. And here's the thing. When you build a bureaucracy with a 53-nation mandate, you inevitably end up doing a lot of things adequately rather than a few things excellently. American military strength, real strength, the kind that deters China in the Pacific and Russia in Europe, requires concentration, not dispersal. Every dollar and every soldier committed to a low-return African exercise is a dollar and a soldier not committed to the Taiwan Strait or the Baltic. That's not isolationism. That's basic strategic arithmetic, and Washington has been getting it wrong for 20 years.
Here's what I want to know, and this is the question that keeps me up at night. If America reduces its African engagement, what fills the vacuum? We've seen what happens when the West retreats. James, where do you see this going over the next 6 months?
The way I see this playing out, and I want to be careful here because nothing is certain, there are really 3 plausible trajectories. The first is strategic drift. AFRICOM absorbs this incident, makes cosmetic adjustments, and nothing fundamental changes. That's historically the most likely outcome because bureaucracies don't reform themselves. The second possibility is a genuine congressional-driven review, which is more plausible now than it was 3 years ago, given the fiscal pressure and the growing bipartisan skepticism about open-ended commitments. But the third scenario is the dangerous one: disengagement without replacement. History tells us that when America withdraws without a coherent handoff strategy, the vacuum doesn't stay empty. China's infrastructure investment, plus Russian military presence, is already the operating model across the Sahel. If that extends to North Africa, the strategic consequences for Europe, for NATO's southern flank, for migration flows into the Mediterranean, that's a serious long-term problem that makes the current AFRICOM budget look cheap by comparison.
Here's what concerns me most, and it's slightly different from James's framing. The real risk isn't just what happens in Africa. It's what this pattern of strategic overextension does to American military culture and readiness at home. We have 2 soldiers missing tonight because they went hiking in mountainous terrain after a day of exercises in a country most Americans couldn't find on a map. That's not a criticism of those soldiers. It's a criticism of a system that has normalized the idea that American military personnel should be everywhere, all the time, in every corner of the globe, without a rigorous cost-benefit analysis attached to each deployment. Ben Shapiro has made this point. America's military strength is not infinite, and treating it as if it is doesn't honor the troops. It exploits them. If this incident prompts even a single serious Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on AFRICOM's strategic rationale and return on investment, then something meaningful might emerge from what is otherwise a very worrying night.
Sophia Reeves, James Chen. A genuinely important conversation, and one that Washington has been avoiding for far too long. Tonight, though, our thoughts are entirely with those 2 missing soldiers and the team searching for them in Morocco's mountains. One thing is absolutely certain. Somewhere in the Pentagon tonight, someone is staring at a very uncomfortable set of questions they don't yet have answers to.
That wraps up today's top stories. I'm Emma. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.